I'd like to welcome everybody tonight. So my name's Jung James, if you don't know who I am, and I have happened to be the president again, because we couldn't convince anybody else to become that. So here I am again. I don't mind, it's a bit of fun, and to find out a lot of things. So I actually learn a lot in this role, and I step up to a lot of things that I wouldn't normally do if I wasn't the president. So that's all good. So I'd like to introduce Shauna to you. Shauna has been one of the old faithfuls in the Jung Society, and she has a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree and a Master of Analytical Psychology degree from Western Sydney University and a Bachelor of Arts Honours degree from the Australian National University, where she is beginning her PhD in philosophy this year. She spent many years producing art, and a selection of her work can be found at the website, so that's in the newsletter. Also, Shauna has spent 12 years of her life devoted to producing our newsletter, and great efforts in being creative and also informative and resourceful and fantastic. Thank you, Shauna. Here we go.
Look, firstly, thank you to Jean and Robert for asking me to give this talk. And also, this wasn't in my script, but I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm really thrilled that you've come. So thank you very much. So I'm excited about doing this. It's a bit dense in places. I've tried to make it as accessible, because it's philosophy, I'll go into that. I try to ground it in experience in parts, so I hope it'll be okay. Anyway, we'll see how we go. So the name of this talk is The Problem of Thought Insertion. Before I explain what thought insertion is, I'll just give a bit of brief background. So some of you may know that Jung called his psychological system analytical psychology, and Jung was influenced a lot by continental philosophy. So this talk is in the area of analytical philosophy, and that's the Anglo-American tradition of philosophy, and it contrasts to continental philosophy. And analytical philosophy sort of started in the early 20th century, and Bertrand Russell and G. Moore were early proponents, and they were students of a guy called McTaggart. McTaggart followed the German idealism of Hegel. So for McTaggart, the ultimate nature of reality was made up of these spiritual beings. But Moore became very pragmatic, and he argued for a mind-independent world, so the physical world that we take for granted. So analytical philosophy leans on science and logic quite a lot, and it has quite a rigorous methodology. You'll have an argument, you'll make a claim, but you have to support that by evidence or your premises in your argument, and they're quite strict on the sort of information that they think counts as good arguments. And in this sense, Jung isn't taken very seriously in analytical philosophy because he's not considered rigorous enough. But having said that, I just want to say I really like Jung. I think Jung's wonderful, and I think Jungian psychology is particularly good in terms of treatment, because Jungians take the first-person experience very seriously, and they also take the therapeutic relationship seriously, and it's through that relationship that healing occurs. So most of my talk is not Jungian, but I tied into Jungian ideas at the end because I think there are really interesting links. I think Jung can shed a lot of light on this area, but this talk anyway is within analytical philosophy, which, okay, so I'll get on to thought insertion. I'll start off with an example of thought insertion. Imagine you have a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder and you know you're getting unwell. You alert the mental health crisis team and they visit you each week. Each week they tell you to raise the dose of your antipsychotic medication. But despite this, you fall deeper into madness. You stay at home in your room. Over the weeks you hear a voice in your head. The voice sounds like thinking, but you know it's not your thinking. You can hear your own thinking on the left side of your brain. This other thinking is happening on the right side of your brain. It's the voice of God. This voice talks to you and you ask it questions. During these weeks you uncover all the secrets you've kept hidden from yourself and you discover the secrets of humanity. You learn that God walks the earth in human form and that this form changes each generation. The God of this generation is telepathically communicating with you, and he keeps telling you to think bigger. By the time you're taken to hospital, you know that you're the female aspect of God. Okay, that happened to me in 1997 during my third psychotic episode, and it's an experience of thought insertion. So my talk is based on my honours thesis, which attempts to explain thought insertion within the framework of philosophy of mind. And that's the area of analytical philosophy that deals with the mind. So, what is thought insertion? It's a symptom in schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders where a patient claims they experience thoughts that are not their own. And the DSM-5 classifies it as a delusion and describes it as the belief that alien thoughts have been put into one's mind. And one study found that 52% of people with schizophrenia experience this symptom. Now, thought insertion, I'll quickly go through the outline of my talk. For the first half of the talk, I'll talk about the philosophical problem that thought insertion poses. For the second half of the talk, I'll talk about some psychological problems, and then I'll tie it into Jung. So the philosophical problem that thought insertion poses is that it challenges what are known as subjectivity theories of consciousness. Now this is a lot to unpack. I'm going to do this slowly. It's exciting stuff because a lot of you probably know that consciousness is a really hot topic. People are talking about consciousness because it poses this problem to science. So hopefully in the first half of the talk I can unpack what that discussion is about. So first of all I'll discuss what consciousness is, then I'll discuss phenomenal consciousness because that's the type of consciousness that challenges science. Then I'll talk about subjectivity theories of consciousness and why thought insertion challenges them. And at the end, I'll give some reasons why I think inserted thoughts are different to normal thoughts. Okay, so I'll try and go through it slowly. But before I start talking about what consciousness is, do you want to turn to the person next to you and maybe try and explain what you think the term consciousness means, just for a moment? Does anyone, is that enough? Or, sorry,
We've only got started.
the rest of the night's gone. Well, look, does anyone, do I have a couple of people who want to, Richard, do you?
Well, we decided that consciousness was when you're aware of what is going on. Like if you're unconscious, if something's hit in the head, you're not conscious. And
Yep.
if you're aware, then you're conscious.
Yep.
I think that's what, isn't that what we decided?
Yes. Also, operating in a different language. I've been teaching kids that can't speak English,
the last little while, and you find that the kids wander off in their consciousness because they can't understand what you're talking about to them. And because they're operating in their own language at home, and they're coming to English, and some of them are from strange countries like Ethiopia and all over in the unusual countries where English is not spoken around them at all. So it's actually very strange for them to be in an environment that actually hear them. And you see their minds go in a different conscious state because they're trying to operate.
That's interesting. Look, do you want to go, Mary? Do you want to?
Well, I'll sort of regard it as mind travel, and people are not aware. They drift off, yes.
Yeah.
The word awareness came to us, and I remember a quotation, only that day dawns to which we are awake. So not aware. Awake, no, to which we are awake.
Oh.
It doesn't. Yes, so if we're not aware or awake to the day, we're not conscious of it.
Yep. Okay.
Awareness.
Yes, so I'm listening. We'll go to the next slide. All of that awareness and attention and what you're saying, I'll explain in analytical philosophy. There are a few terms that contrast with each other. So I'll go through them briefly, but creature consciousness is what we normally think of. It's also called global state consciousness, I think, but creature consciousness. And in that sense, we're conscious when we're awake and not when we're in dreamless sleep or in a coma or under anaesthetic. So in that sense, we're all conscious in the room at the moment. But that contrasts with mental states that are conscious. So at the moment, I'm aware of my visual field, what I'm seeing. I can feel myself pinch myself. They're conscious mental states. But I also have unconscious mental states in that the brain is just doing a lot of processing that I don't have conscious access to. And some of that I can consciously access, but a lot of it I can't. So, for example, if you see a red ball, you see that as a unity. You see the colour and the shape and everything all together. But the visual system processes different parts of that, like edges or colours. So that we experience it all coming together, but it's a bit of a mystery how it all binds together, right? So those things are unconscious mental states, but we have things that we can consciously access. So the brain's just performing a lot of tasks. So when you think of unconscious, you don't have to think of it in a Jungian sense. You can just think that we have conscious mental states and unconscious mental states. Okay. So another distinction is between transitive and intransitive, and this is a subtle distinction. I'm not very good at explaining it. I'm transitively aware of what I'm seeing or my voice in the sense that they're in the centre, the focus of my attention. This is probably what you're getting at, Jean. But I'm intransitively aware of things like moods, in that they might be ubiquitous or subtle or implicit or more, they're not in the focus of my attention. And they're intransitive. So I think that's what you're getting at, that with this kind of drifting that's happening with the kids. Okay, now another distinction is between access consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. So access conscious mental states, they're kind of, this is hard to explain as well, if I understand it properly. They're poised or ready to be used in reasoning and deliberation. So they're mental states that we can access quite easily and use cognitively. But that contrasts with phenomenal consciousness. Wendy, you're looking concerned.
No,
Is it you okay? Okay. Now, phenomenal consciousness is the one that all the philosophers and scientists are talking about. So that's the big one, okay, that causes a problem to science. So I'll spend a bit of time explaining phenomenal consciousness. So it's our first person experience. So we experience colours and sounds and smells and feelings and arguably cognitive things like suddenly remembering something. But these things have a qualitative aspect to them. So there's something it's like for us to have these experiences. But those qualitative aspects vary, like experiencing the colour red is different to hearing the sound of a violin. So can anyone, Mary, tell me what you're phenomenally conscious of at the moment?
I really can't put it into words at the moment.
No, it's okay. You're phenomenally conscious of my voice.
Of your voice, of your presence.
Okay, and that it has a quality to it. It's probably deeper than it should be. Because I have a deep voice.
It's quite a strong voice.
Okay.
You're not using a microphone. I'm aware of that.
Jean, can you tell me something you're phenomenally conscious of at the moment?
I'm conscious of you and your talk.
Okay, well you're phenomenally conscious of the colour of my jeans, for example, and they have a quality.
I think your shirt has a quality.
Like my shirt. I'm glad the shirt went down.
That's really
Well, can you tell me what those two qualities have in common? Okay, so the sound of my voice and the colour of my shirt. They have something in common. Can you think what they have in common?
You.
They both belong to you.
Their sense impressions,
Well,
perceptions.
yeah, not me. They belong to you.
Mm.
Your quality, that you're experiencing these qualities, and they have a subjective aspect to them because they're somehow happening to a subject, which is you. So the experience of red isn't free floating. You know, for someone to have the experience of red, it's somehow happening to a person or a subject of experience. That subjectivity is spelt out differently, okay, and it's a problem, but the thing is that the phenomenal consciousness has this qualitative aspect and this subjective aspect. And this is called the hard problem of consciousness.
And this is also the Gestalt experience of phenomenology.
Okay, well it is phenomenology, it's first person experience, so we have experiences that have a quality. They have a colour quality or a sound quality, but somehow they're happening to a subject. So there's consciousness is this qualitative thing and this subjective thing. And that poses a real problem to science. And okay, so is that, you with me with that? Okay, well I'll explain why it's a problem to science and I'll tease this apart. Okay, so we have a brain which is a lump of matter, right? It's a grey lump of matter made of neurons. Now, we can see what those neurons, we know what the neurons are doing, and we can use a brain scanner and we can see bits of the brain lighting up. But we don't get that first person experience. So I'll do another experiment. Can everyone shut their eyes? Okay, just shut your eyes. Now imagine something, maybe a beach or maybe your lounge room at home. And just imagine, where is the table in the lounge room? Is it in the centre, to the side? Okay, now say something to yourself, maybe your name over and over, like when you're thinking, your inner voice. Say something in your inner voice. Okay. Now, I'm guessing most of you had an experience then. Maybe some of you didn't, but I'm guessing most of you could visualise something or hear your inner voice. Okay, we have an introspective sort of experience in our brains where we visualise and hear things. So did most people probably experience something then? Yeah. Okay, but if you cut my skull open, you don't have access to that picture of the lounge room. You don't have access to that inner voice. You just have these neurons firing. You know, bits of the brain lighting up. You don't get that first person experience. And that's the same for all of phenomenal consciousness. So when we see the colour red, the brain somehow represents that red. But there's no red in the brain. Okay? And I'll give you another experience with pain. That's C fibres firing, which are types of neurons, I think. But knowing that C fibres in the brain fire doesn't give us the first-person experience of pain. And I can never know what your experience is like. I just assume you feel pain in the way I do. And if you're in a hospital, like they'll ask you to rate from 1 to 10 how you feel pain, because they don't have your first-person experience. If you're screaming, you know, they can guess you're in pain, but they're judging that based on your behaviour. So, okay, so that's phenomenal consciousness, okay? We have the brain, neurons are firing, brain scanners can tell us bits of the brain are active, but we're not getting that first-person experience. And that challenges the basic idea of science, which is that the universe is physical. So science is based on physicalism or materialism, which is the idea that the universe is made up of these tiny particles, right? And they're physical particles, and everything's built up of that. So there's no room for a spiritual or a transcendental realm in this picture. Okay? It's just a physical reality. And this is where I became interested in this argument about consciousness, because people with spiritual beliefs often think there's some kind of spiritual or transcendental realm that causally interacts with our universe in some way. That's a lot of religious beliefs, have a picture of reality that's like that in some way. But scientists don't believe in this realm because you can't measure it, right? So, so consciousness, I have to get my thoughts back. So consciousness challenges that physicalist idea, and in philosophy there are two arguments that show this challenge to science. So I'll explain them in a minute, but they're not, the philosophers who like these arguments aren't arguing for a spiritual reality. They're not arguing for religious beliefs at all, but they do think that this picture we have of the physical universe, somehow we have to think outside the box to work out how we can fit consciousness into the universe. So the physical theory of the world isn't complete, science isn't complete, and philosophers have different ways, like saying consciousness is a fundamental part of reality, and perhaps it's spread throughout the reality, and that's spelled out in different theories in different ways, which I won't go into, but they're about the nature of reality. But the next two arguments are the philosophical arguments that show why consciousness challenges this idea that the universe is physical. Okay, so I'll go on to them now. This picture is a humorous picture, which you'll get in a minute when I explain the argument. But Frank Jackson is an ANU philosopher, and this is based on a thought experiment of his. A thought experiment is a method used by philosophers where they imagine certain scenarios to test out ideas. But anyway, the knowledge argument, we have Mary, who's this brilliant neuroscientist, and she knows everything, every physical fact, every scientific fact there is to know about how the brain processes colour, right? But she's spent her life locked in a black and white room, so she's never experienced colour. And then one day she leaves the room and experiences colour, and arguably that experience of colour is a fact over and above all those scientific facts. And so that kind of says that these scientific facts don't capture all there is to know because the experience is something else. Now, Frank Jackson no longer believes in this argument, and a lot of philosophers argue against it, but it's still considered a good argument, okay, to show why this first-person experience is something over and above what scientific knowledge can tell us. Okay, and the second one is the conceivability argument. Now, you can think of this in terms of philosophical zombies. philosophical zombies aren't Hollywood zombies. So this is a Hollywood zombie. They're the Walking Dead and they eat flesh. Okay, but a philosophical zombie looks more like this. There you go. So, a philosophical zombie looks like Jeff. Okay? So, or any one of us. Except it doesn't have phenomenal consciousness. And when we think about it, how do we know Jeff has phenomenal consciousness? So he can tell us what he's thinking and feeling, but we don't actually know what Jeff's thoughts. We don't have first-person access to what Jeff's thoughts are. Okay, so we assume he's like us, and that's a fairly good assumption. So philosophers don't actually think philosophical zombies are real, but the fact that we conceive of them and they're possible puts pressure on this idea, this physicalist idea that science holds. And we can conceive of them. It is possible that we evolved with the brain performing all of those unconscious functions that help us survive, but without us having this first-person experience, you know, just like robots or something. So we'll go to the next one. A philosophical zombie, they're physically and behaviourally identical to humans, but they lack phenomenal consciousness. So if you stick a pin in its arm, it'll yell out in pain, but it won't actually feel the pain. And I'll try and explain the argument. If physicalism is true, this is the argument that kind of says physicalism, you know, that science hold, that thesis is false. So if physicalism is true, two physically identical individuals should be psychologically identical. So zombie Jeff should be identical to Jeff, and but zombie Jeff isn't identical to Jeff because Jeff has this rich first-person experience that zombie Jeff doesn't have. So that means that physicalism is false. Now again, there are different arguments. People argue against this, but it's considered quite a good argument against why phenomenal consciousness challenges this scientific view of physicalism. So that is kind of the explanation around this consciousness. I'm going to go on now and talk a bit about what's in my thesis, and some of it, you know, I hope it's clear, but it'll be grounded in experience again if you just get over the next bit. But is that, I'll pause here and just quickly ask, we'll do questions after the break if you stay, I hope you do, but does anyone have any questions there, or is that, do you understand why you have this phenomenal consciousness that sort of challenges this idea? You have the brain, we know what the neurons are doing, we see bits of the brain light up in brain imaging, but we don't access, you know, the beach I'm seeing or the colour red that I'm experiencing.
So, one simple comment about that physicality. I'm a scientist, so I'm guilty. But that it is now possible for people in a disability case, wheelchair, they can actually control the chair with their thoughts.
Yes. Yes.
So how does that? Because you see, it's always encroaching this. You say that, you know, that things can't be measured.
Yeah.
In fact, more and more things are being measured. So
I know it. What I was going to bring in, Descartes had this idea that the mind was a non-physical substance and the body was physical. And that's called substance dualism. And most philosophers don't like it because a non-physical substance can't interact with a physical substance. And science is based on causality, where only physical things